Ralph Preston. William Lowe and I get together and have these roadmap chats on a regular basis. And tonight we're going to have a little chat about advocating for yourself. This is an important subject because nobody's looking out for you. And if you don't advocate for yourself, you're going to be subject to the way whatever healthcare system you're a part of treat you. So, William, I know you got a couple of thoughts on this that you were going to start us off with. So, why don't you do that?
Yeah, sure. So I think in recovery after stroke, advocating for yourself is crucial because at the end of the day, when it comes to stroke recovery and I guess making the most out of your recovery and achieving your best recovery possible, it's really important to take accountability for your recovery from the start of your journey. Because if you don't take accountability for yourself and your own results and you leave it to someone else to help guide you along the way, then in more cases than not, you're going to be following someone else's definition of what recovery means to them rather than your own definition of what recovery means to you. And in most cases, especially if you're getting therapy through insurance, their definition of recovery, especially when it comes to within the hospital, is being able to walk to the bathroom and also be able to dress yourself so that they can kick you out of hospital. And for any stroke survivor who's serious about their recovery after stroke means something completely different. I would imagine that recovery to any stroke survivor who actually wants to recover is getting back to who they were before they actually had the stroke, or getting back to someone who was as or some degree of recovery or some level of function which was very close to where they were before their stroke. And quite often in recovery after stroke, if you leave this to someone, if you leave it to someone else to define what recovery is, then you're likely not going to get the results which you're looking for, especially in the healthcare system in the United States, at least from what I've been told. Insurance only gives you so many sessions per year. And if you're not improving after so many sessions, then quite often people or therapists don't want to help you even more. And the problem with the treatment that therapists provide in the American healthcare system, or at least from what I've been told, is that there's only so much progress you can make within 12 sessions. And quite often after 12 sessions of therapy, which is provided through insurance, your recovery tends to come to a plateau or or tends to reach a flat line. And once it reaches that flat line, that's and it stops, then that's essentially when when the therapists who provide the treatment for you decide that you've reached the most that you're able to recover after you've had your stroke. And if you allow them to define that for you, then that's the most recovery that you're going to make. And if you're a stroke survivor who's actually serious about recovery, the only way that you're going to get more recovery past that flat line is to actually advocate for yourself and I guess push a therapist for more therapy and for more assistance so that you can teach yourself, or at least help yourself get to where you want to be. Because quite often, at least from my own experience, from what I've been told from other stroke survivors who I've exchanged notes with, is that if you don't take accountability for your own recovery and you don't initiate those conversations with your therapist or your healthcare professionals that you want to actually improve and you need, different equipment that they're offering, then it's not likely going to happen. And it's likely that they're going to assume that you're okay with their definition of what recovery is, which is basically being able to go to the bathroom, being able to dress yourself, and just do the daily essentials. So I think in recovery after stroke, especially as there's no such thing as a plateau or a flat line in recovery, and recovery never stops. If you're a stroke survivor who's serious about recovery and who wants to make the most out of your recovery and achieve your best recovery possible, it's really important to advocate for yourself, especially when it comes to starting this journey to recovery after your stroke. Because at the end of the day, if you don't advocate for yourself, and if you don't speak up for what you actually want to happen in your recovery, then then you're going to be limited by someone else's definition of what recovery is. And I know this this happens a lot because I've personally been told by stroke survivors I've helped that they've received therapy for insurance for years, only for the therapist to say something along the lines of they don't think it's they don't think it's they don't think will be beneficial to uh, to to get the insurance companies to pay for therapy because they're not seeing any improvements. When quite often the reason why the stroke survivor isn't seeing any improvements is because the therapist has been providing the exact same exercise to stroke survivors for years on end, and they haven't seen an incentive to change up the exercises that they've been providing a stroke survivor because the stroke survivor hasn't 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 spoken up about wanting different exercises to really push their recovery further. Um, well knowing well knowing that not not knowing that the reason why they haven't been seeing any improvements is because they've been doing the exact same exercises and things for years on end. And the thing with recovery after stroke is that your brain constantly needs new exercises and new experiences for that neuroplasticity to happen, and for your brain to actually move a lot further in your recovery after stroke and wake up a lot more parts of your brain. And if if you don't speak up for yourself and if you don't push your therapist or your doctors for new things to actually stimulate that neuroplasticity, then it's very likely that you're going to stay stay stuck in the same place that you've always been, and you won't be able to actually achieve your best recovery possible after stroke. So that's why I think accountability and advocating for yourself in your recovery after stroke is really important. It's because if you don't push your therapist and if you don't ask your therapist and your healthcare professionals who are treating you to give you something different to help you move along in your recovery, then they're likely going to assume that you're okay with everything that they're providing you. When most of the time, the exercises that therapists are providing you, in more cases than not, they're the exact same exercises for months on end or for years on end. And as every stroke survivor knows, if you do the exact same thing, and as Ralph and I have mentioned many, many times, if you do the exact same exercise or if you do the exact same thing for years on end or months on end in your recovery after stroke, then it eventually becomes a broken record to your brain. And your brain has no incentive to want to improve because it feels it's already reached the level of mastery where it's mastered whatever skill you're trying to teach your brain. And any other improvement isn't possible because there's nothing new that your brain is experiencing in terms of how it's doing the exercise. You're just doing the exact same thing over and over again. And like I said, broken record. Now, earlier, Ralph, you and I, we were having a discussion about this last week, a very brief discussion about why it is important to advocate for yourself in the healthcare system, especially in the United States. And I mentioned that previously I had come in contact with someone from the States who was telling me about the insurance policies there in terms of how to in terms of how to, I guess, access the healthcare system and some of the different types of insurance policies that that you can be covered with. I was told that there was one type of insurance policy that actually teaches you how to actually advocate for yourself, and I think that's really important. And And prior to this, we had a discussion about that. Would you like to share your thoughts on, I guess, some of these insurance policies and how these can, I guess, teach the average stroke survivor on how to advocate for themselves and why it's important to do this so that they can push their recovery forward?
Sure. Um, First off, one of the most important things you can do to advocate for yourself, you were talking about neuroplasticity, so it made me think about this. Um, and I'm not talking about plateauing, but I'm talking about jumping on your recovery. So instead of sitting around waiting to get into PT, start doing stuff on your own. Um, in the film and video business, when we're on a shoot and things aren't happening, we call it burning daylight. Well, in the sense, if you don't jump on it, you're burning neuroplasticity. Yes, it lasts a lifetime, but you have more of it early on. So if you can get into PT, do more PT at home, not sit around waiting for it, then you're going to take advantage of some of that early neuroplasticity. So that's one point about what you talked about. The other was about how many visits you get. Since we don't have socialized or national health care in the US, we have a wide variety of insurance that people are on. And so what you get in terms of therapy varies somewhat based on what type of plan you have, what type of insurance company you're with, and what type of policy you have, because some people pay for these catastrophic policies because they're cheap. They only cover things that like life-threatening, huge bills, and they don't tend to cover smaller things. So that's one thing. The other thing is we have about a third of all the people in the United States have no insurance. Yeah, one third. So I mean, you certainly have to factor them in. That's one reason why we do this roadmap series, is because there are a lot of people in the U.S. and around the world without insurance. So some set limits on the number of visits that can be anywhere from 10 or 12 to, I've heard, as many as 30. I also know people that seem to go like forever and ever. Medicare has some limits, but they're looser and they're dependent, a little bit more dependent on your physical therapist. Well, jumping around here, but the subject is really complex. Your PT does have some latitude in the whole thing. So there are a number of reasons why you want to establish a good relationship with your PT, because they'll take you more seriously. You'll have do more back and forth. You're more likely to achieve your goals, but also they're, in a sense, the gatekeepers for the insurance companies here. They don't really like it, but that's the way our system is set up. Let's see what else we got about different types of insurance. We have two main kinds, HMOs and PPOs. PPO stands for preferred provider. A PPO tends to cost a little bit more. You can see any doctor you want, whether they're in your network or not. You don't need referrals, things like that. But again, it costs a little bit more. HMOs cost a little less, and you have to go to doctors that are in your network. Now, I looked up what percentage of people have these, and the only statistic I got was if more people have PPOs, which surprised me, 47% versus 13%. That's people who get it through their employer. We also have a variety of craziness in terms of employers sometimes pay for 100%. I know I did. Sometimes they split the costs with you, 50-50 or some other percentage arrangement. Sometimes they don't provide it. People can get, through the Affordable Care Act, healthcare insurance through the government. This gets really, really complicated. But to get back to the basics, you need to look out for yourself because nobody's looking out for you. The expression I use, and I've got a little meme, and I went and got a picture of the cavalry from the Civil War era, and on it I put big letters, "The cavalry is not coming." So you have to learn how to look out for yourself. And this starts like the day you're in the hospital. You have to figure out immediately how to negotiate and get the things that you want in the hospital and get therapy and such that you need to get better to get out of the hospital. I'm a big advocate of learning everything you can about stroke, learning everything you can about the brain, becoming your own physical therapist. And I would extend this to your the whole philosophy of looking out for yourself to your what we call in the States a PCP, primary care physician, your neurologist, any specialists that you see, any tests that you get done. If you want these things to happen, especially here in the States with we have a shortage of healthcare workers. They're typically they're now telling you 3 and 4 months to get an appointment. I recently was ordered a test in early May, and it's not till the middle of October. That's 5.5 months. So what would I do about that? If I'm going to give you one more little tip, people in the States, or actually this probably works anywhere, because any doctor's office, any testing center or whatever maintains a schedule with people's name on it, and people have things that come up and they can't make it and they cancel. So they always have a standby list or a cancellation list. And I learned how to work this. I've looked out for, I've worked with 15 local stroke survivors, and I don't remember the exact number, 5 or 6 or 7 of them, a little less than half. I also advocated for them, so I learned a little bit about this. I carried them, took them to carry them. That's a Southern thing. And I'm a Northern fellow. Anyway, I took them to doctor's appointments and such. And when I wanted to get stuff done, I learned a little trick that I used. And recently I found out why it works. So what I used to do is I'd ask about a standby list. I'd get them to put either me or the person I was working with on the standby list. And then, of course, you're on the standby list and they don't go back to it. You leave, you're off their radar screen. So what I did was I called up every Monday afternoon. I didn't call in the morning. Monday morning's usually busy in most offices, but Monday afternoon or late Monday morning, I would call and remind them that I wanted to be, or I wanted Chris to be on the standby list. And a lot of times when I called on Monday, I was telling this story to somebody recently, and I'll tell you what they told me. A lot of times when I called on Monday, they would say, oh, we just had a cancellation. If you wait for them to call you, they will never call you. But they do maintain this list. And a number of times I'd call up and they go, oh, we just happen to have somebody cancel. So I was telling this story to a speech and language pathologist that I saw recently. And she said, oh, yeah, that's because most people cancel on Monday. A few people cancel Friday afternoon as they're looking towards the next week. So you can also do this. I've never tried it, but apparently people cancel on Friday afternoon and Monday morning the most. So if you want to get your tests moved up, then you can try getting on the standby list and calling them. You don't want to call them every day because you become a nuisance. You'll go to the bottom of the list, or they'll just, you'll get bad reputation with them. That's not something you want. So those are some things that I've learned. So William, do you have anything else?
Yeah, sure. Well, first off, I mean, I just want to highlight everything that Ralph said. I couldn't agree more with everything that Ralph has said. I think advocating for yourself in your recovery after stroke, like I mentioned already, it's super important. And especially when Ralph and I had our strokes. I mean, I had my stroke about 11 years, coming up to 12 years. This October when Ralph and I had our strokes, we didn't have access to resources like watching these roadmaps and learning from stroke survivors who had already traveled the journey. So I think, well, first off, I think learning everything about stroke is really important because as a stroke survivor, especially if you're going to be putting yourself in a position where you're advocating for yourself, then I think it's essential that you have an idea of what you should look out for or need to look out for in terms of what things you can do to actually make that neuroplasticity happen a lot more, so that you have the right questions to ask when you're going to go see a therapist. I also think that what Ralph said about wasting neuroplasticity, that's really important. Remember, you only get so much neuroplasticity, and although it happens all the time, most of your neuroplasticity is at its peak in the first year of your stroke. So essentially, the research shows that the first 6 months is when the neuroplasticity is at its peak. So if you can spend those first 6 months really advocating and asking the right questions and really pushing your therapist to keep changing the exercises that they're giving you, then you're going to be setting yourself up in a really good position to keep that upward trend of recovery going. Because often in recovery after stroke, what happens is that, and I'm going to get a little bit scientific here, is if you want to think about a graph of recovery, quite often recovery after stroke, what we tend to see is that whenever you do a new exercise in recovery after stroke, you tend to see a spike in recovery, and then after about a month or two, you reach that flat line. Now, if you're a fan of not advocating for yourself and not asking your therapist and not pushing them, then you're going to likely stay in that flat line. But if you're constantly asking questions and if you're constantly pushing your therapist to really push the edge of their comfort zone, then your recovery curve is likely not going to be like this, but it's going to be more of a gradual upward trend towards a place you want to be in your recovery after stroke. And that's at least from what I've been told from many stroke survivors, including ones I've worked with, that's what we call a really good situation to be in, because you're constantly recovering, you're not plateauing at all. And also when you're constantly recovering, that also gives you an opportunity to apply some of the things which you're learning in therapy to real life as well. And this and advocating for yourself, especially in the healthcare system, it doesn't just mean asking questions from your therapist and asking them to give you more exercises. It also means not just keeping yourself accountable for your own recovery, it's also keeping your therapist accountable as well. Because quite often, when, at least from what I've been told from other stroke survivors, when you don't ask questions from your therapist, then that 1 hour or 1 hour and a half that you get to spend with your therapist, that can easily become 1 hour and a half of the therapist just watching you do the exact same thing which you did last week and for the last couple of months. There's no change in the exercise. It's just a therapist asking you how your day was and just doing and just going through the motion of usual, I guess, small talk to just let the minutes go by until the top of the hour comes. So I think I think the way to really push your therapist and get your recovery going is to, like I said, also not just keep yourself accountable, but also keep your therapist accountable as well. So what this could mean is whenever your therapist gives you an exercise, you could go home and you could do the exercise and you could video record yourself doing the exercise so that the next time you see your therapist, then you can both go over the tape or go over the film of yourself doing the exercise and ask them as many questions which you need to understand why they actually suggested the exercise in the first place and how it's going to be relevant in helping you improve your recovery and what their reasoning is behind it. Now, if you can get in a situation where you're constantly probing your therapist's brain for why they suggested something and how it's going to help you in your recovery, then you get a good idea of whether or not your therapist is able to help you. Because in my own experience, a therapist or a doctor who really knows stroke, they should be able to explain why they're suggesting the exercise which they're suggesting in a really simple way, so that you not only so that you're able to understand it and how it relates to your situation. Because if you see a therapist who can only explain it in terms or phrases which they can only understand themselves, in other words, using medical jargon or I guess, using scientific terms, then they likely are just going by the book, and they just don't and and they don't know why they're doing what they're doing. So if if you can get in touch with a therapist who can actually explain to you why they're suggesting the exercise which they're suggesting to you, and how these are going to help wake up the connections in the brain, not just from the surface level, but I guess a granular level from a neuroscientific standpoint, then not only do you get an idea of whether or not this therapist can help you, you also get an idea of how how neuroplasticity works, and and this can help build up your own understanding of how recovery happens in recovery after stroke. Because at the end of the day, I mean, this just worked for myself personally, because obviously when I had my stroke and when Ralph had his stroke, we didn't have access to resources like the roadmaps that you're watching right now, and there wasn't as much research into stroke recovery as there is now. But by asking these questions from your therapist and from your doctors, then you can also gain a great understanding of how stroke recovery works, and how and and I guess the types of things you can do to actually make recovery happen. Because at the end of the day, in recovery after stroke, nothing happens. Recovery doesn't happen to you; it happens for you as a result of the actions which you're taking on a day-to-day basis. Whether this be asking your therapist questions, pushing them to go go the extra mile to come up with something new to actually help you, rather than just allowing them to dictate the agenda for each session. I think I think if you want to be successful in recovery as a stroke survivor, um, it can be easy to fall into a trap of allowing your therapist to decide the agenda for the session, and allow them to get away with doing the exact same thing they've suggested to you for the last couple of months, rather than pushing a therapist to actually do something new which you want to do, to actually push a recovery forward. Because, like Ralph said, even with the setting up appointments and following up on people, following up on people who haven't called you back, they're not going to call you back unless you actually follow up and initiate that contact. And the same thing goes with therapists as well. Unless unless you push therapists, and unless you initiate that you actually want more recovery to happen, they're likely not going to come out and say that they came up with a new exercise which is going to help you, because they have other stroke survivors and other patients to attend to, and it can be very easy to do things by the textbook, or treat every stroke survivor like someone on a production line, or like a textbook case, because you don't need to put as much effort into coming up with something new, or coming up with a new exercise to actually help that stroke survivor. So all in all, I think in recovery after stroke, advocating for yourself it's crucial, because if you don't take accountability for yourself in this journey, and if you don't keep your therapist accountable or your doctors accountable, then it's going to be very hard to keep that upward trend of recovery going, and it can be very easy to fall in the trap of allowing someone else to define what recovery means to them, means to you, based on what they think recovery means. When obviously for yourself as a stroke survivor, you know what recovery means to yourself, whether this be being able to walk outside to the supermarket. Maybe it means I guess just being able to lift up your arm on the table, and being able to just being able to show people that that you can do that at a dinner table. Well, none of that is going to happen unless you push your therapist to actually work together with you to make that happen. And that really all comes down to accountability and advocating for yourself. So that's basically everything I have to add uh, from from what you shared, Ralph. Um, I also think that the insurance policies are also important as well. As Ralph mentioned, a third of Americans are not covered by insurance. I think whatever insurance I mean, I don't live in the States personally, but I think whatever insurance you get, um, make the most of make the most of what that insurance covers, and use that insurance to give you greater access to people who can help you even more in your journey, and also help you learn more about stroke recovery and everything to do with stroke. Um, I mean, I mean, if you don't have insurance, you can obviously watch these roadmaps and they can be really beneficial. But having these roadmaps and being able to watch them together with also taking accountability for yourself, and having a gatekeeper within the healthcare system who can give you access to greater resources, that's even better. Because having a support network in recovery after stroke is crucial. And I think the stronger your support network in stroke recovery is, then the better your recovery is most likely going to be. So that's everything I have else to add. And I'm just going to pass it back to you, Ralph. I've been talking for a bit now. Did you have anything else you want to add to the folks watching?
I got a couple of little things. One is I always well, I kept a list like this around for my therapist every week, and I would go in with a list. If I didn't take it in, I would look at it in the car and memorize it and ask as many questions. With doctors, I definitely take a list of questions because I don't know why, but a lot of people in the U.S. seem to think that doctors are like gods and they're like scared of them or whatever. They'll actually, most of them will take the time with you. If you have a feeling like your doctor isn't going to take the time with you, if that annoys you, you can look and get another doctor. One thing I did was, if that was the case with certain doctors, what I'd do would be to prioritize the list. So if I ran out of time, I'd at least ask the most important questions. Let's see, a couple more tricks. There's certain things that you can do if your insurance covers ER visits. Actually, they've got another term for ER these days. But anyway, you can sometimes go to the ER if you. A lot of people can't get in to see their neurologists for months. I don't know if they have a neurologist on duty all the time at the hospital, but I do know when I turned up with AFib, I made an appointment with the cardiologist. They told me 4 months, 4.5 months before I could see him. And I said, I'm just going to not walk around like this forever. I remembered something that the doctor said, which was, if you have any issues, they always have a cardiologist on duty at the hospital. You can go to the ER. So I thought about it for exactly one day. And the day after I saw her, I just went to the ER and checked myself in and saw a cardiologist. If you're looking for answers, I had some questions about my heart, and I went to the cardiologist and said, "Can I wear a heart monitor for 30 days?" And they said, "Sure, don't see why not." That would never have happened if I didn't do it, and it was relatively revealing. I was having these low blood pressure events and kind of like borderline passing out. That's why I did it, and it revealed a lot and helped with that whole issue. Let's see, one more thing. A lot of times, the hospital systems that are supposed to talk within the one hospital system don't necessarily, and you complicate it by going to multiple hospital systems. I like to go to about 2 hours away to Charleston for my neurologist and some of the specialty doctors, but I don't like driving 2 hours each way to get a blood test. And the CAT scan machine here is fine. Though doctors there will actually tell me, they told me recently when I had a electroencephalogram that they preferred that I do it in Charleston because they trusted their technicians more and that they did it in a different way than most hospitals. So I said, okay, I'll drive. So sometimes you go to a neurologist and they don't have the scans for you. What does that mean? That means they'll throw you back in the pool to come, to get back out in 4 to 5 months. So whenever I'm doing that, I call and make sure that my scans are going to go. And then I make sure that they've gotten where they go. I one time saw a post where a guy was all upset because he waited 5 months to get into his neurologist and they didn't have any of his scans. And I said, well, what did you do? Well, of course, and rightfully so, in a perfect world, the healthcare system should talk to each other and function properly. However, most healthcare systems are, won't use the word broken, but they're certainly fragmented and they don't talk to each other as much, and they don't always do what they're supposed to do. So if you're real anxious about some answer that your neurologist is going to get off of your scans, then maybe you ought to follow through with the imaging center and then the neurologist's office and make sure they got there so you don't have to wait another 5 months. But what it mostly all comes back to is, common sense and taking the initiative. You got to remember that the doctors are working for you. Everybody acts like it's a privilege to get to see them and that, they control everything and you have no control over it. The way I look at it is I'm nice about it, but I'll get on standby lists and I'll push things a little bit in a nice way. And the way I look at it is they're working for me. They're collecting my insurance money, my Medicare money. So don't be scared of them. Take a list. If you're worried about not getting to the bottom of the list, I took a list to my neurologist on a follow-up visit where they released me they did another CAT scan. He had that about 3 or 4 months after my stroke. They wanted to look and make sure I'd stopped bleeding and that kind of thing. And they were going to release me. And I asked him what that meant, and he said, well, it means I don't need to see you anymore. I said, well, what if I need to see you? And he said, well, then make appointments and come on in. So I did, because these people are the only way we can get answers. And the first time I went, I took a list with 17 questions on it, and he answered every one. It took about an hour. And that I was impressed by that. So anyway, those are some tricks that I've learned over the years. Let's see, what else have we got? Anything else? Most insurance resets at the end of the year. So every January you can, depending on your insurance, most do, you can get more therapy sessions. You might need a new letter from a doctor to get in, a new referral letter. You might not. Depends on therapy place and your insurance. So that's something a lot of people weren't aware of. I also found out that somebody told me that my Blue Cross would pay for 2 sessions a day. If I went to PT and OT on the same day, they only counted as 1 visit. And I got 30 visits. So I did the initial evaluations, and I did 29 more sessions where I went to both. So I got, almost basically double the amount that I thought I was going to get. So you have to ask around. You have to be a little bit pushy. I found that it pays to be nice, not be too pushy, because you don't want to get a bad reputation. So that's pretty much all I've got. William, unless you've got something else, I guess we'll say goodbye to the good folks at home listening to this and see them next time.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I just got one more thing to add, just one final thing. I think it's really important on that theme of taking accountability and taking initiative. This is just a trick I learned for myself. I think it's really important at the end of every session that you have with your therapist to also come with an action plan for what needs to be achieved for the next week. For example, you're going to go home and do an exercise, and the next week you're going to come back and you're going to see the therapist, and And one good thing to do is ask the therapist what results or what improvements you should be expecting with that exercise, so that next week when you come back having done the exercise, then you can go to them and you can say, look, I did this exercise, I saw this change, whether or not you did see the change. Obviously, if you didn't see the change, you know that something's wrong. Either you didn't do the exercise, or the exercise just wasn't a good fit for you. And then you could go back with them with the film of you doing the exercise, and you could both dissect that film of you doing it. And you could ask them, what are some of the things that you're doing good, and what are the things that you're doing not so good in the exercise, and what could be done better in order to make your recovery progress a lot further, and what's the next step after that. And just asking that question, what's the next step, that can incentivize the therapist to come up with something new rather than just settling with doing the exact same thing from the previous week. And I think if you constantly have that action plan in place, you're constantly pushing the therapist, not in a pushy way, but you're constantly initiating that progress in that theme of, wanting to move forward in your recovery. And by doing this, it's very easy to track your progress, and also ask your therapist for feedback on whether or not they see any improvements. Because if you see some improvements, then you know that something's working. And if it becomes no progress for so many weeks in a row, then you know that something needs to change, and that your therapist needs to change something. So that's the final thing I would say. And as you can see, it's all about taking accountability for yourself, advocating for yourself, to get the most out of the therapy which you're getting provided, or within your support network, so that you can make the most out of your recovery.
That's a good point. One of the things when we talk about relationship with physical therapists is goals are always important. And I got one final tip based on that. You mentioned, you're going to do an exercise at home, come back and demonstrate it. I suggest to people that they get homework from the physical therapist. They do the homework, you establish that rapport, you're working on goals. You got to make sure you do it during the week so you can go back in the next week and show some progress. Because the therapists, I've talked to at least 6 or 8 therapists, and I've asked them this point blank. They know who is working hard at home and who is coming into the therapy place going, I'm here, make me better. So you'll get more out of your relationship with your physical therapist if you ask for homework, do it, come back and clearly demonstrate to them that you do it. And when you have that kind of good relationship, one of the reasons I established that was I wanted to become my own physical therapist. I have to know why everything works or what the reasoning behind it before I want to do it. So I found that if I had that real kind of a positive relationship with physical therapists, that they let me pick their brain more. So it was completely self-serving that I did that on a number of levels, because I go home and do the exercises, come back, have a good relationship. I move on to new exercises. I'm getting better quicker by pushing the physical therapist, and they're more receptive to me asking them a lot of questions and explaining things, mainly because they see me going home and walking the walk, literally and figuratively. I didn't even think about what I was saying there, but so that's true. So that's my final thought. And William, unless you got anything else, I think we'll say good night and thanks for your time, and we'll see everybody next time.
No worries, Ralph. Thank you. It's great to chat with you again.